Guys, what is up? It's Halsey with the Helicopter Podcast, and I'm super excited. I'm always excited. I feel like I need like a new intro because I always just kind of say the same thing, but I guess maybe like that's my thing. I don't know. I'm always super excited. Uh, always a pleasure to be talking to fellow helicopter pilots and friends. And today is a unique episode because as you've seen on my podcast, I have a lot of just friends in the industry. I went to a big flight school. And then throughout my different career choices, I've met new people. And today's guest is a guy named Brian Monroe, excuse me. And Brian and I actually didn't really know each other all that well. My very first day on the line at Maverick, flying helicopter tours, I walked into the pilot lounge. I walked right here to Brian, introduced myself, and he said, "Hey, good luck, man. I'm leaving for air medical tomorrow." So it was really on his last day. And then, I kind of saw him on Facebook, very active on social media. Definitely like a pilot's pilot. This guy loves helicopters. So I'm excited to talk to you, Brian, about that. And then, ironically enough, my buddy Ian, who also works at Helicopter, is good buddies with Brian. They were roommates in the past. And now Brian has jumped on board doing some side sales for Helicopter. And so it's kind of a fun deal because I know Brian, but I really don't know much about Brian's helicopter path, history. And when I say that this dude loves helicopters, this dude loves helicopters. So, Brian, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Hey, Halsey. Thanks for having me. Hey, everybody.
I like your background there, man. What do we got behind you?
Oh, thank you. Well, of course, the Bell 407, and to the right there is the H-125, also known as the Squirrel.
So do you have experience in both platforms, 407 and 125?
I do. So, I definitely I like every helicopter I've flown. They all have their own personalities per se, but definitely more of a Bell guy myself. So just handling characteristics, the way they fly, but I would never turn down a opportunity to get behind the stick of a Airbus either. So I have flown both in a air medical capacity.
So I've always wondered because I tell people, um, and I think I'm right or semi right. I say pound for pound, the H125 is probably the best single engine platform regarding power, performance. It's just an amazing helicopter. Don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, I love the 407. Like, if I ever have enough money to buy my own helicopter, I'm going to get a 407 because I'm not going to use it in areas of high elevation or whatever where I'm going to be limited. Would you
Right.
is am I right? Is the 125 pound for pound a more capable aircraft?
I would say so. Just power to weight ratio. If you're in an environment where you have shorter legs to your mission, maybe an hour or less, then the H-125 is a little better at getting you out of confined areas. Definitely. Where we fly is mountainous, so I would definitely choose the H-125 for that reason, and also its fuel management characteristics. But just if you had one flight left in your career, or myself, that's my opinion. I would choose a 407 just based on comfort. Um, maybe not as the pilot so much. It still has that bell feel to it. You are leaning forward a little bit, but if you're a passenger, if you just want a great experience, then the 407 is it as far as light singles are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I love the 407. Admittedly, I don't really have any 125 experience. So it's a platform that I would love to fly. I have a lot of friends, obviously, you included, that have flown the 125. And,
Hmm.
anytime as a pilot, you can put new ink in the logbook of a new airframe. It's always something that I always really enjoyed. Uh,
Absolutely.
I know that you've kind of switched around. I mean, you've been in the Bell products, you've been in Airbus products. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about on the show, because we're just going right into helicopters here, which is probably good because it's a helicopter podcast, is
Absolutely.
for me. I try to tell people all the time, like, look, it doesn't matter if you're 100-hour pilot and you're going from the R-22 to the R-44, or you're a 5,000-hour pilot and you're jumping into a new aircraft that you've never flown before. That
Hmm.
first flight to me is always very awkward. Like I'm always so excited. Like I guarantee I can set the picture up. Like if I had the opportunity today to go fly a 125, be super
Hmm.
stoked. Never flown the aircraft, minimal A star time in general, and it's been years. So it's like I've never even touched one. Uh, I guess
Hmm.
my experience in the Airbus would be at Maverick, in the H130, but again, different platform. I
Right.
feel like I would be super stoked. I would get in, I would do my flight, I would land and be like, ugh, I don't think I like it. Just, I feel weird. I didn't know where to look and I didn't know, And then I go to bed that night, I think about it, and then I go fly the next day and it's like, okay, I love this aircraft and it's awesome. Have
Right.
do you am I kind of just solo in this thought, or have you also experienced that where it's like you go to a new airframe and it's just maybe kind of overwhelming at first, which kind of takes away some of the joy?
Yeah. I would say, a good example of that was, back in 2011, um, Maverick had a interview flight as part of the interview process. So I got to go up for an hour with Dwayne in the training bird,
Oh
and
man.
that was, yeah, it was totally fun. So of course, yeah, I mean, about the first 5 hours in any new airframe, it's kind of a awkward experience, I would say. So most helicopters fly, somewhat similar, but um, yeah, definitely the 130 was more of like a industrial type experience, coming from mostly, like a 206 or Robinson type product. So, just how much throw the collective has in cruise, how much pedal input you had. So, of course, that was a lot of fun. But even, after 5 hours, I feel like once you get the hang of an aircraft, you never want to get too comfortable. So I always try to look at it like, through new eyes. No matter how many hours you have under your belt with a certain airframe.
Yeah, Maverick was an interesting experience for me because up until that point, I had 27 hours of turbine time when I got hired at Maverick, and it was in the Bell 206. I was flying relief
Hmm.
tours at Mount St. Helens and amassed a whopping 27 and a half hours, I think. Got to give myself that half. And,
Woo, all right.
I had actually, Kyle Pratt had got me in the door at Maverick a couple years earlier, and I
Yeah,
chatted with
good
those
dude.
guys, and it was an awesome chat. Like we sat down, we talked for like 2 hours, and it was such a bummer because I wanted to work there so bad, but they're like, oh man, I'm sorry, we just have like a 300-hour turbine requirement, blah blah blah.
Hmm.
And I'm like, no, I get it. And they knew I was actually interviewing at Sundance the next day, and they're like, yeah, you're gonna kill that. Like they're gonna hire you, and they're stupid if they don't. Well, I guess they're
Right.
stupid because they didn't hire me. Um, and like I don't know, I did my own thing and it was awesome. Like the experience that I had between Maverick, my first time I chatted with him, not getting the
Hmm.
Sundance position, and then ultimately ending up back at Maverick, like that 3 year period was incredible. And I don't think my life would actually be kind of the same if I didn't have that period. Like I don't think I would be in sales. So many different
Right.
things happened within that time. But going into Maverick, getting in the 130, that was like a little bit of a trip because for that last 3 years, 44 only. Um, and
Hmm.
again, before that, only 27 and a half hours of turbine time in a 206. Might as well call it like a big 44. And so the
Right.
Airbus, I was like a little shaky. I remember what's the little airport that we train at Maverick to the south?
Gene.
Gene, yeah. So we're at Gene, and there's myself and the two other guys that are in the same class, and then John Bowling was my instructor. And
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
remember like, come on, I love JB.
Oh, he's awesome. He's awesome.
He's hilarious. And I just remember like it took a couple hours for sure. Like the throw, the pedals was so different, and I think that's really what was wonky,
Right.
right? Like you're used to like these little sensitive pedal movements, and now you're in the 130, you get the Fenestrum and the big vertical fin, and you're really having to like press a lot of pedal. And so I think that
Hmm.
that kind of threw me off. But yeah, I got better, obviously, and then flying with Dwayne at the end was incredible. What was your interview flight
Yeah.
like with Dwayne? What was he? Was it like, hey, let me show you how awesome I am at flying the 130, or did you actually fly?
I feel like it was a little bit of both. So he was just making sure that the experience on the paper matched with some basic airmanship qualities. Hey, take me to this airport. Hey, let's see how you enter the pattern. What your radio calls are like, because you know as a experienced pilot at that point, you should be able to jump in an aircraft and at least make the radio calls and enter the pattern. It's not going to look pretty, but I feel like Dwayne does have he has some pretty high standards, not just for the aircraft, but also situation awareness and um, you know safety items, which was good. So I felt like there was a lot of that side. So let's see how you do, and then also demonstrated a few maneuvers as well. So I did have an opportunity before that to bring up some students to that area, and so this was not wasn't that familiar with the area, but Dwayne did a lot of the hey, take me here. Here's the radio calls that we're going to make. So I felt like it was a great learning experience, and for the most part, any year after that, all the recurrent training was done with Dwayne as well. So, like I said, I mean, there's always more to learn. It was definitely a great experience, and I learned a lot even just from watching him. How he was flying the aircraft with all his experience.
Yeah, Dwayne could fly the aircraft and he could fly it well. Yeah, and he was so
Absolutely.
interesting. I don't think I had ever dealt with a person like Dwayne before, in a positive way, um,
Hmm.
because he was so funny. Like he was hilarious, right? I feel like if
Right.
if he lost his medical tomorrow, he could walk across the street to the Luxor and do stand up or something along those
Absolutely.
lines. I feel like he would be like one of those kind of new age comics that I don't know if they really do a ton of jokes. They just talk to people in the audience and kind of like chirp at him a little bit. Like I feel like Dwayne would be
Right.
really, really good at that. Um,
Yeah, it always felt like certain jokes of his, his mannerisms and such were like spring loaded.
yeah,
You know, so
it's
it was always
it's he just was witty and fast. But then you get in the cockpit with him, and it was like, my gosh, this guy can fly this machine. I remember I guess I did my check ride with Robert Grant, but before we do a check ride, you do like the actual check ride, right? With Dwayne, like
right.
he's probably the guy that kind of really signs off. And
Hmm.
that flight was so much fun because I flew well, but then we did so many autos, like different characteristics, different profiles, and
Hmm.
he was just we were doing things in a helicopter that I hadn't really done before. And I had the opportunity to do
Yeah.
a lot of different auto rotation profiles teaching CFIs for 3 years at Hillsboro. But I hadn't
Hmm.
ever actually kind of done what he was doing, a lot of low level takeoff, you know, short base to final, oh, engine failure. It was just like boom,
Right.
boom, boom. It was like just kind of super fun. And I always really enjoyed flying with Dwayne, and I enjoyed his humor. I really liked just going up to the office and chatting with him. And I Hillary and
Hmm.
I were back in Vegas a couple of years ago, and I stopped by, and no one was in the office except Dwayne. It was good to catch up with him. So, kind of
Absolutely.
moving, we might touch more on Maverick here, but I'm kind of curious. Like I said, I don't know a ton about your background. If I were to assume, I feel like you're kind of like me, where did you come out of the womb, ready to fly? Were you like a little kid that was like always new? You just kind of give me that vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, as far as my family's concerned, my family was very supportive. Love my parents. But yeah, neither of them were in aviation. So my dad sold insurance. Mom's a school teacher. So I definitely, as long as I can remember, I was just always fascinated with aviation and in particular helicopters. Um, so maybe it was just happenstance where we lived in California. Um, we lived just south of a pretty busy class golf airport. So we're also up against some terrain. So it was kind of a popular transition corridor for a lot of the helicopters. And of course, at that stage, as a kid, I didn't understand that, but I just knew that there was always helicopters flying over.
Sure.
So, that was part of it. So before I was even in elementary school, I knew that I had some interest in it. And as luck would have it, at the elementary school I went to, I think I was about 7 years old or so. So um, once a week, we would go to the library there and get to check out a book. And I found a book on helicopters. So I just kept rechecking that book out. It was just so fascinating to me. So even, in second grade, I just kept rechecking out this book and I was learning different types of helicopters, the Sikorsky S-76 Spirit, um, Jet Ranger, Long Ranger. So even as just, a little kid, I could, at least somewhat name some of the helicopters that were flying over, which was awesome. So my parents were very supportive of it, but definitely it was more of a, push. Hey, if this is what you want to do, then, you know, get after it. So that was a
Yeah,
great
that's
lesson too.
awesome. You were in second grade learning about helicopters. I was just trying to color in the lines,
Well, I still
I
can't, but
Yeah, helicopters didn't strike my passion until um, I was around 18, 19 years old. It was just kind of a random demo flight that I did. I kind of thought like, hey, helicopters would be fun, but really my whole dream as a kid was airplanes. I was obsessed, and you know, every time a plane flew over, I'd look up, so, oh, look, it's a Cessna, this and whatever, and to the point where my friends
awesome.
would get all annoyed, like, oh, hey, look, Halsey, it's a Cessna. Ah. And I'm like, well, actually, that looks like a Bonanza. So,
Nice
so I
try.
definitely
Right.
was kind of similar in that. Um, I had a guy named Eli Malloy on the podcast. I don't know if you know Eli or follow him on social at all. He
Oh,
has a
yeah,
pretty
absolutely.
large following, and he puts out really cool stuff. Shout out to Eli,
Hmm.
and congrats on Eli just having a kid, him and his wife. So that's cool. But
Awesome. Congrats, Eli.
he brought up an interesting point that I never thought of, and that was like this idea of being a first generation pilot and
Right.
kind of some of the complexities that go with that. Other than like if say you grew up in a house where your dad was a pilot,
Hmm.
helicopter, go even one further. If your dad was a career helicopter pilot or your mom, the path might have been a little bit simpler in the idea of like you just kind of have an idea of what's around the corner.
Hmm.
What early on, in your flight training, what were misconceptions that you brought into helicopter industry as a whole? And you may not be able to recall, and that's fine, but was there things like, oh, well, that was different than I thought it would be? And it's just kind of this lack of, hey, look, my dad sold insurance, my mom's a teacher. I don't know anything about helicopters or the industry.
Right. I would say, for me, I do remember just being fascinated with, of course, the fun part of flying is just the flying aspect in general. But I didn't have any view behind the curtain, so to speak, as far as all the work that goes in behind the scenes. So, maybe 5% is in the cockpit, whereas 95% is all the book work. It's maintaining the knowledge, it's picking new things to learn, new things to study, um, working on yourself, so self development. And that's a lot of what it takes to being successful as a professional pilot is not just the flying aspect, but I go back to like flying tours. You're interacting with just people from all over the world, so a lot of self development, learning about um, as much as you could about geology and you know um, I'm somewhat of a introvert, so just learning how to talk to people better and um, I felt like that was tough for most of us, was getting out of your shell as far as just focusing on the machine. It's also focusing on the task at hand. What's the mission today? So I would say it's a lot of that behind the scenes kind of work that's it's monotonous at times, cracking the books and really being hard on yourself.
Yeah, it's how old were you when you started flight training for helicopters?
So I was 15.
So you
um,
started young.
um, yeah, I would say so. And
15's
I
young.
wasn't. Yeah, and it wasn't really possible for me to continue at that point, just financially. So I was 15 when I had that first lesson, and then luckily the school I went to, they had a great piece of advice. It's like, hey, if you can't do the flying, focus on the ground portion. So here's a test prep book. So, you know, go through these are the questions that you need to answer. Here's some books. So, I was able to kind of get started more with the ground and then fly here and there. Um, and that was how it was until maybe another 9, 10 months later, to where I could get a job to start supporting that addiction,
Yeah, yeah, you
so
definitely
to
have to.
speak.
Yeah, it's not cheap. The civilian route, especially, obviously, it's if you're out of pocket. What you
Right.
you brought up a term kind of earlier about professional, like being a professional pilot, and
Hmm.
obviously you've been a commercial paid helicopter pilot for many years now. What does it mean to you to be a professional helicopter pilot? What does that term encompass for Brian?
So I would say it's being well-rounded. So, and this isn't my term, but law enforcement pilot told me at one point that there's pilots and aviators. So, the pilot gets in, you're safe, you go out and do the job, and then you know when the skids are down, okay, I'm thinking about something else. And then an aviator is more well-rounded, so you're always in the books, and that's always what I strive to be myself. Um, and hopefully it rubs off on anyone else, because I think you can really get foxholes, per se, in whatever industry you're in. So especially if you're busy, if you're flying, 5 days on, 2 days off, of course you need that time to decompress. But an aviator, always improving their station. There's always more to learn, and help those around you as well. Not get to that point where you're just stagnant.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There's so much, and it took me a long time to personally to kind of understand that. Even at 200 hours with a job as a CFI, I didn't get it. I didn't grasp kind of the whole site picture. To me, I think
Hmm.
being a CFI, one of the things that I learned the best, or the most, I should say, was actually understanding like, oh, it's so much more than just stick and rudder or stick and pedals in the helicopter sense, right?
Right.
It's getting a sense of this whole picture. Being able to fly safely, monitor your gauges and just the overall helicopter, listening for noises, feeling for vibrations, and then also knowing
Hmm.
exactly where you are and where everyone else is. Now some of
Right.
the technology makes it pretty easy, right? You can look on your glass cockpit and see where everyone else
Oh,
is. But
absolutely.
you're listening to the radio, and I always thought it was fascinating on how the brain kind of starts to work, and what is it, neural pathways are connected. Like training
Hmm.
at Hillsborough was very busy. There's like 100 airplanes just at the flight school. There's 20 helicopters, and then there's other general aviation traffic and a
Hmm.
121 intel operation that's operating all day, taking intel employees to and from places, and
Hmm.
it's very busy. And it was so funny to me, like how I would fly a different helicopter every 2 hours. But no matter what helicopter I was in, that N number became like my name. Like if someone said my N number, it was like someone just said Halsey. And it's like
Right.
you get that same, like if you're walking in the street and someone's like, "Hey, Halsey," you almost kind of get that surprise of, "Oh, hey," someone saying my name.
Right.
Just like that idea of being able to hear ATC, blah, 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 your tail number. And it's like, oh, boom, that's me. It's just like
Right.
you kind of pick up that whole site picture. And for me, being an instructor, that was kind of the where I really began that. So you did all of your flight training in California then?
I did. Yeah, all the initial training was at a small flight school. So in years previous, the closest airport that I lived to did have a helicopter school. It's the largest in the nation at the time, but they had closed up the doors, and this other school that I went to was kind of an offshoot of that school. So the owner was an instructor at that school. Um, so that was great. It was still somewhat local. It was about 30 minutes away. But also, um, I love the fact that there was a local airport that I was able to spend some time at. Even being a young man, so I ended up working at that um, airport. Um, getting early dismissal and such, and all that money went into the flight training. But it was great that it was just perfect timing that they had an opening available. Um,
Were
but
you
yeah, so
working
that was
line
in.
service?
I was not. So the story is I sent emails to all the local companies at three different airports that were within drive time. And the only company that responded was the one that I ended up interviewing at and working at. So I was a mechanic's assistant or apprentice. So I was
Cool.
working under an IA. And yeah, it
Wow.
was great. So yeah, it was mostly fixed wing. But we got to go up and test fly the aircraft. We always had a radio going in the shop there. The owner was a pilot, so some of those lessons applied to both airplanes and helicopters. So I wish it was helicopters, but looking back on it, I think it was great to get some level of experience with fixed wing as well. So anytime we went up, I couldn't log the time. He wasn't a flight instructor, but it was just still, really great to get all that exposure. So between that and Flight Sim 2002, um, that's, where I spent a lot of that free time in between being able to afford those lessons. So it's about one lesson every 3 weeks, making $8 an hour.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It's surprising. I was. It's funny. I was talking to Ian this morning. We were meeting, and he was asking like, "Hey, are you like a gamer?" I'm like, "Nah, not really a gamer, but I probably have like 10,000 hours of flight sim time as a kid." You know, um, and my guess is like you were probably the kid that was playing flight sim that was like legit doing it correctly. Like really probably got the high level of it. I'm like, I'm like, hey, where's the hover button in the helicopter? Like, why is there no button to hover? I remember being so confused. That was like Flight Sim 95. Probably by the time 2000
okay,
came out, I was becoming a little more proficient. Um,
right,
I think that anyone who's young, if you're listening to the podcast and you're, say, in high school right now, and you're passionate about aviation, airplanes or helicopters, I love the idea of working at the airport. I worked at the airport. um, it would be dishonest of me to say that all my jobs have always been aviation centric because, in order to help fuel my flying addiction during high school, I worked two jobs. One was at the airport, working line service, and that was even before I was 16. My God bless my parents drive me 30 minutes, an hour round trip to get to work. A few days a week, working line service after school. But I
right,
also worked at a local pizza shop. So kind of with with the combined income and getting a discount on the flight training because I was, an employee at the airplane flight school there. I was able to, fly a fair amount, enough. Um, so, to me, working line service, and I did it for many years. I did it at that airport. I did it at the big airport for
hmm
which is now Atlantic, but it was a different FBO back then. And then I did it at the helicopter flight school that I worked at Hillsboro. And I don't know. I just think that that's a great way to start being more involved about aviation. And you learn so much. You learn so
right,
much about aviation just by immersing. It's almost like if you want to learn a new language, the best way to do it is, if you want to learn Spanish, go live in Mexico, immerse yourself.
right,
So it's to
yep,
me it's like a huge recommendation of like, hey, you got to go and work line, work dispatch, do something. So
right.
what at what age did you get your PPL then?
So tail end of when I was 17, um, and then I continued on from there. So paid for about 80 hours out of pocket, and then my father was able to help me. He co-signed for a loan at that point, just so I could get it knocked out. Um, so yeah, like you said, I mean, I was still saturated with aviation at that point, and just my style. personally as well, I like more hands-on when I'm a student, versus just cracking open the book. So, I think that's another great thing about going to a school that, they were really looking out for the best interests of everybody involved, not just trying to fly you. So you didn't end up with like 70 hours, if you're ready at, 40 to 45 hours for that private. So, so yeah, yeah, I was just under 18 at that point. So like I
Cool.
said, it was about, yeah, one lesson every 3 weeks. But I felt like, I was always at an airport, I was a total airport bum. So, um, all my friends were, on spring break mode and stuff, where I was like excited, hey, I get more time off to be at the airport. So it wasn't just working on the planes, it was washing them and, really just, trying to surround myself with, some great mentors at that point.
Yeah, it's awesome. I there's a resort community here in Central Oregon where I live now called Sun River. It's an awesome little
Mhm.
place. It's like my happy place. And we would go every year, once in the winter, once in the summer. And, we would be there for, I don't know, 7, 10 days each time. And in the summer, my parents and my brother and family friends, whoever we're with, they would be going to the mall and playing mini golf and, going swimming and rafting or whatever. I would wake up in the
Right.
morning, I would ride my bike to the airport, and I would just sit there all day. And a plane would land, the guy would taxi in, I would go and talk to him. Plane would land,
That's
just it was just like what I did for
awesome.
a week straight. Hey Brian, we're gonna pause real quickly here for a little sponsor call, and we'll be right back with the Helicopter Podcast. Hey, podcast listeners. My name is Halsey Schreider, and I'm the principal broker and owner of Celicopter. Celicopter is a new age, data driven, helicopter specific sales brokerage bringing helicopter listings to new heights. At Celicopter, we utilize digital positioning, paid advertising, and our large network of industry professionals to move your helicopter quickly and efficiently. Unsure the value of your helicopter? Lucky for you, Celicopter offers a complimentary market evaluation. All you have to do is contact the team today. Are you ready to take your helicopter listing from Mayday to payday? Celicopter. List it, sell it, done. Back with Brian Monroe here on the Helicopter Podcast. Thank you again to Celicopter for sponsoring the Helicopter Podcast. And Brian, I'm actually pretty excited to have you on the Celicopter team. It's pretty cool that you'll be
Thank
joining.
you.
You're obviously a well-connected guy, and you're very passionate about helicopters. So pretty much checks all the requirements of what we have in a great sales rep. Something that I find interesting with you is you've made it seems, at least from the outside perspective, that you've maintained a lot of passion. During the little break there, we were just talking about how as kids, for me specifically, I was nuts, loved, eat, sleep, breathe aviation. And as I've gotten
Right.
older, for whatever reason, I'm still super passionate, mainly about the industry. I love the fact that I'm in this industry. I love the people. I love talking about helicopters. um, but I have lost a little bit of like this aviation passion to fly a little bit. Like it doesn't. I'm not as stoked all the time on it. And
Hmm.
there's probably a lot of factors in that. A job is a job, moving around constantly. Anyone can gripe about pay, and I certainly have in the past. So I think it's a combination of factors. So I'm very pleased with being in the industry on the sales side and having my own business. For
Hmm.
you, it seems like you've kind of been able to maintain a passion. What, how have you done that? And where are you kind of at right now in your passion level for helicopters?
So yeah, something that I think helped me with that was being on the other side of the fence per se for so long. So I promised myself that, you know, if I was able to make it in this industry, that I owed it to, my family, mentors, and myself, just to keep myself grounded and never let myself get to that point. Always remember, um, being a 5-year-old on the other side of the fence
Totally.
per se. So, I I look at it like that, and any job you do, it's not going to be forever. So even if you're not where you want to be per se, hey, I'm doing this job is a um, like a leap pad, to get yourself some, into a area where you really want to be. I would say just make sure that you remember that, hey, it's not going to be forever. Try to absorb as much as you can in that certain sector. Whether it's 111 degrees outside, and you're on your third flight that day, it's like, hey, these are the lessons that are going to prepare me for what I really want to do. So um, there's not always going to be a level of comfort to being especially a helicopter pilot. So
Yeah, and you have to. It's perspective is huge, right? And attitude is everything. I've always
right,
been a firm believer that you can't control most things in life. Uh, Life is going to happen. One of the few things that I feel like we have control over is our attitude.
right,
I can choose to wake up in the morning and be in a horrible mood, or I can choose to be in a great mood. And if I wake
right,
up feeling like I kind of on the wrong side of the pillow, I can turn that around. Um, I can change that attitude, and I think that's a lot with flying. I've had different
right.
experiences in my flying career where I've been checked. I remember I was probably like 700, 800 hour CFI. I was enjoying what I was doing. I was home. I grew up near Hillsboro. So I was around friends, family. I was coaching football. I was doing things that I really enjoyed, and I was flying helicopters at a young age and getting paid. So, I had a lot to be stoked on, but I had moments of like, oh, I hate this, the monotony. I can't fly with another student or blah, blah, blah. And then, something would happen. Like I would go and do a demo flight. There was a guy at Hillsboro that would come every year for his birthday. He was probably at that time in his late 20s, and he had
Mhm.
I think cerebral palsy. And 365 days a year, he was looking forward to this one day for a 30-minute flight in a helicopter.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to fly with him at I think 3 years maybe in a row. And I would be like, oh yeah, 30-minute demo, an hour later coming back from the downtown heliport. Like I really tried to make it awesome for this guy. And that would
Yeah.
put things in perspective for me of like, man, I'm, 22 years old. I'm flying helicopters. I'm able bodied. I'm able to do this, so
Right.
those moments I feel kind of like put you back in your place. I loved flying air medical when I would land on the ground pad, and before you know it, there's like 3 or 4 kids, on the other side of the fence, and especially if you get to shut down and you're waiting for your med crew, show them the helicopter. To me, like I
Oh,
was that
absolutely.
kid, right? Just like you said, I was on the other side of the fence for a long time. Um, and ultimately, I kind of chose a path. I chose, as I got older, I was maybe more passionate about entrepreneurialism and seeing if I could run a business, seeing if I could do a business.
Hmm.
That kind of that passion kind of felt stronger than maybe flying daily. And I'm glad that I'm still in helicopters and I still get opportunities to fly helicopters. Something that I know about you recently, I think it's recently, is obviously you've been flying, you had your PPL when you're 18 or even before you're 18. You've been flying helicopters for many years now. You're a passionate aviator. You get to fly cool helicopters, do cool things. And when
Absolutely.
you're not flying your cool air medical helicopters, you have recently, I believe, chosen to go back to a flight school and give flight training in the Robinson platform. That's not something, in my opinion, that's common. What spurred that,
Right.
and what has it been like to kind of go back from commercial helicopter pilot where you're not teaching and you're just doing your thing and you're flying nice helicopters to now going back to teaching, putting your teaching hat on and flying in an aircraft? Look, I'm not a Robinson basher. I like Robinson. But it's a different machine, right? Way different than what you're flying. What has that been like to kind of go
Yeah.
back?
So, um, yeah, when I moved to Colorado, the flight training market out here was such that there weren't very many local schools. So, um, and starting in a completely different sector was like starting over. And there wasn't an opening here at the local base. So I was already commuting out of state and just picking up as much OT as I could. So it was a great learning experience, flying at different bases, but that prevented me, from being able to teach. So not just, the proximity of where schools were, but, also just being, you know, immersed in learning, a new aspect of the industry. So, when I was actually at Maverick, as much as I could, I was moonlighting down in LA teaching, still so freelance. And that was fun as well. Just always being in the books as well. And trying to help out the next generation. Um, so that was fun. But yeah, so it was about a 6.5 year hiatus from teaching. So some of the things that I feel like were interesting, coming back to it. Now there's more EFBs out there.
Yep.
Um, so you have
For our listeners that may be unfamiliar with that, what's an EFB?
so it's a electronic flight bag. So a tablet like an iPad. And even in air medical, we've switched from having an entire paper GOM and what we call Metaport charts. So all this paper we've gotten rid of, and we've went to more of a electronic solution. So we can run checklists off those. We can run for flight off there for flight planning. So I was familiar myself with using that EFB and using for flight, so more of a digital um, type solution. But just really seeing that perspective. You know, when I think you and I started, it was all paper charts. The aircraft that I learned to fly in, all the R-22s and the 44. I mean, we just didn't have any automation. So especially in the R-22s, no GPS at all, one radio. Um, so that was a lot of fun. So especially ferry flights, down from Washington or Oregon, just using sectional charts the whole way was great. But now, getting back into it, seeing how the up and coming, are learning, it's more automated. So, and seeing that, I've had to adjust my teaching technique as well, um, to incorporating still kind of the old ways, so you still have to learn how these numbers, come to exist, that your flight computer just, spits out to you.
Sure.
So things like that, yeah, are great. So especially the technology there, ADSB didn't exist back then, um, and I would say as well, social media. So that wasn't big back in 2004 when I started. Probably same for you. Not having all these great resources, but word to caution as well. Seeing how much of that is taken over as well. Students that come into our school are already doing a lot of research. So word to caution here. Make sure that you're getting your information from a reputable source. So, there's a lot of, for the lack of a better term, keyboard warriors out there. So I know it's been touched on the show before, but definitely, go to a flight school, get your information from, certified flight instructors, not, just anyone that is out there on the internet. So
Yeah, you do have
would
to
you
be
agree?
careful. I mean, you have so much. It's a double edge, right? Because there's so many resources now of being able to learn when you're not at the flight school, whether it's through
Hmm.
YouTube or Google or Facebook or Instagram, whatever it may be. There's so many different platforms where you can go and get information, and some of the information is really good. Some of the information is not so good. And some of the social media is actually just downright toxic. I would say
Oh
the
yeah.
helicopter industry, for whatever reason, a lot of the pilots online have kind of taken a stance of toxicity. Um, and
Hmm.
that kind of bothers me a little bit because I think it's a turnoff. I think a lot of these new gung ho excited pilots could jump on a large Facebook page for helicopter pilots and be like, God, these guys are whack, so
Absolutely.
that kind of drives me nuts. I am curious. Technology is great. When you get into an aircraft and there's more technology available to you, specifically like in a professional setting where you're flying, say, air medical or you're working as a commercial pilot, not so much flight training. It's nice. It's really nice to have those tools. Being able
Hmm.
to see other aircraft, pop up on your displays, amazing. That was always a fear of mine as a midair, and it can still happen,
Hmm.
obviously, right? But to be able to have that vision, is incredible. But I
Right.
often, I would say as I was transitioning out of flight instruction, there was starting to be kind of a change where students were coming with more technology. iPads were starting to become a thing,
Hmm.
smartphones. Back in our day, we just had like our technology was like an EA6B calculator, where you weren't actually having to
Oh
do the
yeah.
physical whiz wheel.
Hmm.
What for you teaching guys and gals, how do you how do you get them to embrace and be excited about the technology that they're using, but how to use it safely? Because at some point as a new helicopter pilot, there's a lot of distraction. If you're looking down at your
Hmm.
iPad the whole time or you're doing this, you're not flying the aircraft anymore. How do you get people to use the technology but not abuse the technology?
Yeah. So, see a good term for that, a threat that's emerged with all this new technology is automation dependency. So I make sure that pretty early on, I'm teaching great airmanship as much as possible, and we'll start with all the old school methods. So being able to use that E6B, using charts, things like that. It's an easier transition, going from something like that or like an aircraft with steam gauges. It's an easier transition from there to get to that technologically advanced aircraft. So something with full glass, like the A Star that I'm flying right now, full glass. So especially in a VFR environment, that can really suck you in. So whether it's an A Star or the 407, I got to start in air medical. It's a brand new 407 GXP. So just incredible. Two 10.4-inch displays. It does everything short of cooking your breakfast for you. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
But but knowing that will suck you in, it's a great tool, but that's it's almost like an art form, is taking a step back and selecting the appropriate level of automation for the environment you're in. So if you're low level VFR in a especially a helicopter, you want your eyes outside as much as possible. So I definitely try to bring that to the training environment as well. So you start with an aircraft that doesn't do much for you, but we start there, and then you know, hey, one day you'll be in an aircraft that'll do everything for you. So I feel like it's building blocks, and good foundation is what we're going for.
Yeah, totally. It's funny because what I see, obviously, I work with a lot of private helicopter owners, guys that are,
Hmm.
successful in whatever career they're in. And they have kind of this epiphany of this, hey, I want to fly helicopters, not as a job, but as a way of getting from point A to point B, whether it's for their work or just something that they're passionate about doing. And
Right.
it's crazy to see how much technology these guys are bringing into their cockpit, and it does scare me a little bit because I think as like guys like you and I that are higher time, more experienced, we're able to like see it and be like, hey, this is great stuff, but what's the most important thing about flying the helicopter, right? And
Yep.
I think it does worry me a little bit, like that people are becoming so just glued, to their tablets, uh, that there is like this dependency, and I feel like you as an instructor, yeah, it's great. You can teach the whiz wheel, you can pull out a sectional and put a plotter on and do your course that way, and do the wing correction angle, whatever it is. but then they
Hmm.
get their PPL and it's like all bets are off, right? So if you're listening to the podcast right now, embrace technology, use it. There's great tools, but don't become dependent on it. Don't uh, to me, it almost takes away part of the experience of flying a helicopter. Part of the amazing part of flying a helicopter compared to, say, an airplane is it's like an extension of your body. It's like putting on a pair of pants
Hmm.
and going. And, so, use the technology, but don't overuse it. Don't become dependent on it. I've had plenty of iPads overheat on me in the cockpit, right? And then it's like,
Hmm.
oh crap, you know. So it's just interesting, to kind of see where the industry is moving. You have expressed, and you've told me that you have interest in becoming a DPE, designated pilot examiner. Have you
Hmm.
looked into that process at all for our listeners out there that are curious about maybe going that route as well? I have some familiarity with the process because I've looked into it myself. It's been a bit. What kind of research have you done?
So the research I think started as a applicant, so flying with a DP, and seeing what they did and what their role was in the aviation um, um, world. So something that I was always drawn to was being part of a good safety culture. And as a as an applicant, you're trying to prove um, that you can operate the aircraft safely. But for the examiner, that always interests me because they don't have a lot of time to really determine that you're safe. They go up with you for maybe an hour at a minimum. So um, that's something I felt like I'd always like to do, and I just wanted to make sure that I really had a good base of knowledge to draw from. You know, because I wouldn't feel like it would you're doing a service to your applicant if you weren't the things that you're trying to correct weren't rooted in actually seeing these things. At that point it's just words on a page. Hey, um, this is what I've seen. This is why I want to make sure that you're doing it. I always felt like that was key. So make sure that you have a good base of knowledge first. Um, I do have some friends, and I've talked to DPs, about the process, but I feel like something that has changed in recent years is the application process. So it's more of an online type function. So there's a online management system for DPs or for applicants to be in a DP. So really it depends on your area of operation. So what district you're in and whether or not there's a need, and of course who else is in the pool of applicants in your specific area. So um, you definitely have a better shot if you live in an area where there's several schools. So LA, Pacific Northwest, Texas, there's a big need for it um, down there. So it is definitely a really important aspect of the industry, and I feel like there's a lot of teaching that goes along with that as well. So it's not, of course, you're not a teacher at that point, but really, I think you still are. Even though you're not correcting things on a check ride, so you can still have a positive influence. And I was lucky to have some great DPs to learn from when I was up and coming as well. I mean, those guys were great. So yeah, we'll see what the future holds with that.
That's cool. Yeah, I've always kind of toiled the idea, and I may retoil it soon. I don't know if that is a term,
It
but
is now.
it is now coined hashtag retoil. Um, I've always had this, because I agree with you. I feel like DPEs obviously serve an important role, but even beyond like their quote unquote responsibility of providing check rides, it's almost like they're an ambassador for the industry as a whole, because it's usually
Right.
guys and gals that have a fair amount of experience. They've been in the industry, they've done a lot of things. They understand so many different levels of the industry that most applicants, most students, private commercial instrument guys probably just don't have that grasp on. And so I always felt like I could probably be a decent ambassador and that would be a great
Yeah.
opportunity for me to get back flying. But then I kind of struggle with like, man, do I want to go and be a part-time DPE and doing maneuvers in a 22 or a 44 with a student? I don't know. I think that's a bit of a consumption for me. I feel like I would probably want to become more current in the aircraft, which I tried to do here locally. I was hoping to work at one of the local flight schools just doing like stage checks. I thought that would be a fun way to fly.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't have a piece of paper that says I went to college, so I can't. This flight school unfortunately doesn't, because of their relationship with the college. They just have that
Hmm.
rule, which is fine, but it was kind of a bummer because like, man, that would have been fun. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence, but obviously, I think you would be a great DPE. I think that
Thank you.
you're an ambassador to this industry for sure. You have a lot of knowledge. You have a lot of excitement, about helicopters, and so keep us posted on that. If you end up
Absolutely.
going through the process and becoming a DPE, I'd love to have you back on to just kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. I have friends that have,
Yeah.
have have become DPE, and I'm familiar. You apply, maybe get selected. There's a waiting period. Then I think you go to Oklahoma City for a week on your dime
Hmm.
to do some training, and then you kind of cut loose. I guess I don't know, um, but yeah, I would love to kind of hear more about it if it's something that you end up doing.
Hmm.
Other than that, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
It's been fun to kind of learn more about you and your helicopter past. It's incredible how young you started. How old were you when you got your CFI?
So I was, yeah, just turned 19 and was
Wow.
able to, yeah, kind of, get everything finished up there. Um, but yeah, when it was a process, about a 4 year process. So I feel like that also has made me relatable, especially on the civilian side, because it can still be rough, especially now. It's more of a financial burden. So, I mean, I was there. I didn't just have all the finances squared away. So it was a 4 year process. So, I mean, I was like a professional student at that point. So,
No, that's
yeah, that
awesome.
was that was great.
And I always tell people too, especially young men and women that are thinking about getting into aviation, whether it's helicopters or airplanes, it's okay to get a student loan, right? I mean, there's a lot of 18, 19-year-old kids that will take out a $55,000 loan for a car.
Hmm.
What's a $75,000 investment into your future?
Hmm.
It's not ideal. I have fairly low interest on my student loan, so I'm still paying mine off because it doesn't necessarily make sense to just kill the balance just based on my interest rate. But I hate paying it. That's like, man, it's just monkey on my back for the last, 15 plus years. But,
Right.
it got me to where I am, right? I mean, I would not be, I wouldn't be a helicopter pilot, wouldn't be in helicopter sales. I wouldn't be in this industry that I love so much. And so it's that student loan that got me here. So,
Yeah.
I encourage people, it's expensive. If your family can afford it and pay for it, that's great. Um, but if they can't, there is scholarship opportunities and other programs. But yeah, take a loan out if you have to. Just make sure you understand the terms. Make sure you understand what your obligation is. I went into that blind. Um, Second I passed my CFI check ride, that payment was due. My first payment was due. It was deferred with no interest till that point, but then it was
Hmm.
due. And then it's like, well, I don't have any students and I don't have any money. I was like, oh crap. So I ended up defaulting on the loan for like 12 months. I didn't pay because I couldn't. It's like, do I eat or do I pay the loan? And that
Right.
racked my credit. I've had to work hard to get back up to strong credit, but and just make sure you understand the terms. But again, Brian, thanks for coming on the podcast, and to our listeners, thank you for listening to the Helicopter Podcast. I love the feedback. I love seeing reviews. Speaking of which, if you would like to leave a review, you should. And the review can be 5 stars, glowing awesome. It could also be 5 stars, but with some critique. Hey, do this better or talk about this. I want to listen to your feedback and I want to take it and just keep getting the show better and better. Uh, I'm hoping here in the next week or so, depending on when these actually air, we'll be announcing some exciting news and some new partnerships that we're working on to just further the reach and the expanse of the Helicopter Podcast. And thanks to guys like Brian that come on the podcast and tell their story. That's what it's all about. It's about trying to connect helicopter pilots with other people in the industry. And I think that this is a fantastic age that we live in, to where we can just get on here and talk about helicopters, and somehow people listen to it and they enjoy it. And so thank you again, Brian, for coming on. If you
Thanks for having
like the
me.
Helicopter Podcast, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform. Go to social media. I need your love on social. Give me a follow, give me a like, whatever it's called these days, on Instagram and or Facebook. It's the Helicopter Podcast, super easy to find. And we're going to keep pushing out episodes. And again, thanks for listening to the Helicopter Podcast. Brian, have a good day, brother. Thanks for coming on.
You as well. Thank you.